Welcome everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the debut of IIE Global Office Hours. Before we get into the topic and who we are, we do want to do a quick mic check, or sound check. So if you are watching us right now live, please type in the comment section below this video whether you can hear us or not, or if we need to speak a little louder. So let us know. And just a housekeeping point, my producer, who's behind the camera, Nikki Levinson Angula, will kind of be the voice of God. So she'll be looking at the questions that we get from the audience and making sure that you all can actually hear us. So you might hear her voice from time to time.
And hi, everybody. This is Nikki.
There she is.
All right, I think we can get started.
Okay, great. So my name is Shauna Childs. I am the social media editor here at IIE, the Institute of International Education, and I'm joined here with Christine Ferrugia, who is the Deputy Head of Research here at IIE, and we're here to discuss a new report that came from her shop, which is called Globally Mobile Youth, International Secondary Students in the United States, 2013 through 2016. This report was conducted by the IIE Center for Academic Mobility Research and Impact, and it was funded by the State Department's Bureau for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Before we get into everything, I just want to hear from the audience, if you all are watching, where in the world you are, which city, which country, which organization you might be tuning into us from. So let us know where you are. Okay. So before we begin, here's how the show is going to run. Christine is going to give us the Cliff Notes version of the report with the top line, the top 3 findings from the report. I'll ask you a few questions, Christine, and then we will take questions from the audience, which I know that you all prepared because you all are just so eager to delve into this topic. So Christine, without further ado, for those who didn't read the report or may have read it when it first came out and need a refresher, what are the top 3 things to know from this report?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that nowadays we're seeing students coming to the United States at younger and younger ages. So international high school students are coming here in greater numbers, and they're really doing so not so much for cultural exchange, which still exists, but they're very much seeking to use high school education as a pathway to higher education. So the students are really expanding the ways that they're coming to the United States and are coming at earlier and earlier ages. The other thing to know is that the growth has been very strong. So we are seeing more and more students coming, and the interest is very high. But we have seen the growth slowing over the past couple of years. About 3 years ago, we saw 8% growth, but this has slowed to about a 1% growth in the past year. And then I think the third thing to know would be that the students who are really driving this trend are the students from China. We've seen a lot of student growth from China, both in higher education as well as in high school. But at the high school level, it's really Chinese students who and their families who are willing to invest in international education and who are coming and driving the growth that we're seeing at the high school level.
Awesome. Okay, and so just a reminder, we are talking about Globally Mobile Youth. It's a research report that came from IIE with support from the State Department. And if you want to get your hands on a copy of the report, head over to our website, which is iie.org. It's right there on the home page if you just scroll down. That way you can see the infographics, you can see the press release, you can download and save the PDF of the report. So I'm going to the second question, or getting into my prepared questions really, which is, you know, the Washington Post, AP, NBC News, quite a few major news outlets actually covered this story because for a number of reasons. First of all, because the United States is the #1 destination for globally mobile young people for college and university, and high school is often a pathway to college and university. So a lot of the news reports covered the main top line findings that you just shared with us, especially focusing on Chinese students, parachute kids, as some people may call them. But what are some angles to the data or the story that we may have missed from the main story or coverage of this report? What are some alternative views of that?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people focus on it, and it is very true that this growth is very much driven by student demand. So there's students who are definitely seeking the education, but high schools are also a part of the equation. We've seen a really strong growth in the number of high schools who are actually seeking out international students. Just in a 3-year period, we saw 500 more schools start to enroll international students. So now we have just under 3,000 U.S. high schools who actually enroll students. So it's really, the high schools are definitely seeking, to internationalize their programs, to provide that global education for their own students who may never get a chance to go abroad. And they're also, international students are also contributing to the schools and the communities economically and in terms of, enrollment and helping to keep some schools open because there are some parts of the U.S. where the domestic student population is actually declining. So in order to maintain strong academic programs, you need to be able to fill the classrooms, and international students are helping to do that for U.S. schools.
That's awesome. So I didn't even realize that high schools, American high schools, are seeking out some international students. So that's good to know. So you kind of touched on it before, and this is a little off script, but just talk a little more generally about why it's valuable to have international students in the classroom at the high school level and the college level.
Sure. I mean, international students definitely bring the global perspective to the classroom, and when you have students from all around the world, they have different ways of viewing things and are just able to bring their own their own backgrounds to the U.S. education system, and that's really important for a few reasons. I mean, one, because we live in a global world, so when students graduate, even if they never leave their hometowns, they'll be working for international companies, or they'll be working with people from all over the world. So it's really important to have those global competencies and exposures to people from different countries. So that's really a key reason why having international students is helpful. And then also what we know from our research at the higher education level, we know that students who graduate with a bachelor's degree from the United States, only about 15% of them ever get a chance to study abroad. So most students, U.S. students, don't ever study overseas, and so having international students coming here really helps to bring those global perspectives for students who might not ever set foot outside the U.S.
Right.
And I just want to ask our speakers, this is Nikki behind the camera. We have just one person who's saying the volume sounds a little low. I think it's okay for everyone else, but maybe just speak up a tiny bit.
Okay, thanks,
Okay,
Nikki.
great.
And thank you for making those points about the importance of international exchange. And I'm going to take a break from this report to put a plug in for Generation Study Abroad. Generation Study Abroad is an initiative run by IIE, and they are hosting the IIE Summit on Generation Study Abroad October 1st through 3rd in Washington, D.C. So head over to generationstudyabroad.org to get more information and to register for the summit. So enough about the summit. Going back to the report, what does all of this mean for higher education? Most of our members and people who know about IIE are people who work at colleges and universities or within that international higher education space. What are the implications of this report, and how can they apply what they've read to their careers?
Well, there are a lot of implications for U.S. higher education, and I think the main one being that for higher ed institutions who are seeking to enroll international students, you can now find them in your backyard. There are many here, almost 80,000 who are here in the United States already. So it is definitely possible to find those students domestically here within the U.S. This also has some implications because often the the admissions professionals at the institutions who will encounter these international students are maybe the ones who have domestic territories. And so, you know, there's some implications there in terms of making sure that, you know, the ones who have domestic territories really are able to answer the questions of the international students and are able to provide the information that they need when they go on these school visits. So that's a really important point, because what we've heard is that, you know, there's a lot of challenges for the students and for their high school counselors in terms of understanding the web of different kinds of policies that higher ed institutions have in place for admissions. You know, some schools are, you know, treating these students more like domestic students in terms of the tests that they require and the application procedures they have to go through, and then others are treating them more like international students, like requiring the TOEFL exam, for example. So there's just a lot of different policies in place, and it can be a little difficult to navigate that for the students and for their high school counselors. And actually, colleagues of ours with NACAC, the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, have also done some research on this and have recently also put out a report looking specifically at the counseling needs for these students. So it's definitely a good report worth checking out as well.
Great. Thanks, Christine. So this leads me to my last question, which is all about our famous Open Doors report. So November 13th, we will be releasing the 2017 Open Doors report on international students in the United States, as well as American students who go study abroad. And it's really our flagship publication, which is also funded by the Bureau of Cultural and Educational Affairs. I just wanted to know, will we see the trends that we're seeing at the secondary school level reflected in the higher education level? Can we get a sneak peek at the data that's coming out?
Well, I'm not going to give you a sneak peek because that data is coming out in November. But you know, I can talk generally about the trends because we've been tracking how the high school trends mirror what's happening in higher education. And in some ways, we'll see some similarities with what's happening in higher ed, but in some ways we won't. And really what that boils down to is that at the high school level, the international students coming here are really coming from East Asia, mostly from China. So when we look at the growth that we've seen from Chinese students, both in high school and in college, we see, you know, similar rates of growth we've seen over the past several years. But then there's whole populations of students, such as students from India, students from Saudi Arabia, and other parts of the world that come to the U.S. in large numbers for college or university, but they really don't come to the U.S. for high school. So we see very few of those students even interested in high school education for a number of reasons. So we won't see those trends quite mirrored at the high school level just because those students tend to come just for college or university and not at the earlier ages.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Again, my name is Shauna Childs. I'm the social media editor here at IIE, and I'm here with Christine Ferrugia, the IIE Deputy Head of Research. And we're talking about globally mobile youth. It's a report on international secondary school students here in the United States. So I think we just wrapped up the prepared questions. I asked earlier on of the audience members, where in the world are you? What part of the world? Which state? Which city? We'd love to hear where you're from, so just let us know. And also, if you have questions specific to the data or something in the report for Christine, now's the time to ask those questions. So fire away, please. And of course, you can get a copy of this report right at IIE.org. It's right there on our homepage.
So we have this is Nikki behind the camera. We have a lot of people listening in from New York City.
Great.
And we have someone from Herndon, Virginia. I would love to know where some of the other people that I've seen are from. And I have another question. If anyone listening was an international high school student.
That's a great question.
That would be great to know.
So if you didn't hear Nikki off camera, if you happen to have been an international student or if you currently are, let us know and tell us where you're from. We'd love to hear. Don't be shy. Tell us where you are. Tell us what your questions are. So I mentioned earlier that Christine Ferrugia is from the IIE Center for Academic Mobility Research and Impact. This report was funded by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, so thank you to them. And Christine, I just wanted to ask you more about your division. Tell us a little bit more about the other kinds of research that your team conducts. This is one report. It's a continuation, I think, of the Charting New Pathways to Higher Education report, which was released back in 2014. But tell us about the suite of research reports that you all produce.
Sure. We do a lot of different kinds of research, but all focused on international academic mobility. So looking at students and scholars and their flows across international borders. And it's really interesting work because we're able to really understand how different countries are working together around education issues and around different topics. Some of the upcoming reports that we have coming out, we're working currently on a study as part of our Generation Study Abroad initiative that is connecting study abroad with employment outcomes and the development of employment skills. So that's a really exciting study that we've conducted this year, and we're just preparing the final report, which will be released at the IIE Summit in October. So that's a really interesting work because there's a lot of assumptions around the fact that study abroad does help contribute to employability, but we don't really understand how that works and the skills that students gain when they go abroad that they can then use in the work environment. So we're really excited and looking forward to that report. And then we've also done some recent work this year doing surveys of U.S. higher ed institutions to really understand and gauge and monitor the ongoing impact of policy changes and political changes here in the U.S. on and how that's impacting the interest in international students in studying here in the U.S. So we've conducted joint surveys with other higher ed associations throughout the course of the year, and we'll be launching another one this fall to document the different flows of students across the year.
Oh, so thank you, Christine. I think we have a question.
We have a great question from Jessica Carey. Christine, I'm going to be loud so everyone can hear you.
Okay.
I'm wondering about the migration trends for international high school students in the U.S. I know they are mainly coming from China, as mentioned, but I'm wondering if you think this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Perhaps students are interested from other countries, but clearly institutions are mainly focusing their outreach on China. Would you recommend any other specific countries for recruiting beyond China?
So, yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, definitely the student interest is there from China, and I think that just in itself is one reason why institutions are focusing their recruitment, because that's where there is student demand. And I know that there are a wide number of countries where international students are coming from at the high school level, just not in the same numbers as we see from China. We see strong interest, for example, from South Korea, from Vietnam, from Mexico. We see a lot of these students coming from around the world. One challenge for high schools is that they often don't have a very large admissions staff, so it can be very difficult for them to do a lot of visits and do a lot of outreach around the world and build the connections the way a larger university with a larger admission staff might be able to do. So I think that's one of the limitations or challenges for some high schools who really want to diversify their international programs. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, a factor is that the schools are really focusing on where the largest student demand is coming from.
That's a great question.
And we have another question from Sergio. How is the current political situation affecting international students studying in the U.S. and trends in their studying at the U.S. at high school and university levels?
So that's a question about the potential political impact?
Yeah. So this is something that we've been doing a lot of work on, at the higher education level. As I'd mentioned, we've done a couple of surveys, and you can get those research reports are available. The ones we've done throughout this year. I think at the high school level, there's a little bit of a different dynamic going on. And what we know from our higher education research is that students, certainly from like the Middle East and from South Asia, like Indian students, they're the ones at the higher ed level who've been expressing greater levels of concern about possibly studying here in the United States. But as I mentioned before, those students don't really study in high numbers at the high school level. So I think in terms of Chinese students and East Asian students, they've been less concerned, or we've seen less concerns coming from them about the political situation here, and they're feeling welcome and wanting to come to the U.S. So so it really depends, I think, on where the students are coming from. But at this point too, I'll also add that it's a little bit speculative. So until we actually see what students arrive on campus, that's really the only way we can really know what the impact will be.
Yeah, so it's been a very busy year for research, obviously, because of the surveys that you all have been conducting. So I had a question about specifically Chinese students. I've been watching the trends from the Open Doors reports and the various surveys that you all have conducted, and it seems, at least from a novice perspective, that Chinese students are pretty resilient and they continue to come to the United States for both high school and college and even graduate school. So I just want to know which factors seem to most impact them, or why is it that there are so many students from China in particular who are seeking education here?
That's a great question. I mean, what's really driving the Chinese student demand is the fact that there's such a large and strong and growing middle class in China. So they have the financial means to be able to study overseas, and they really have shown that they are willing to invest in sending their children abroad for education. So there's been that financial component to it, but I think there's also a cultural component in terms of the fact that Chinese students and families are really they really prize an international education. So there's a perception that certainly the quality of the U.S. degree is something that carries over to many countries, and so they're wanting to invest in high quality education, and they're willing to do that internationally. We see even in high schools in China, they've developed international programs or international tracks within the schools in China. So even students who stay within China can sort of major or focus on an international track. They can learn and be taught in English, and so we're seeing just a lot of focus within China on sort of a more globalized education, whether or not the students actually do leave China or they stay at home.
Yeah. Great. So I just want to talk a little bit more about IIE Global Office Hours in general. So we have the great fortune of having Christine with us, and we will probably see her face a few more times over the next few months. But this is going to be a monthly live event right here on facebook.com/IIE Global. And the purpose of office hours is not only to meet with research, but to give you updates on particular reports or happenings right here at IIE. So Christine mentioned the Study Abroad survey. Earlier this year, as a part of the IIE Generation Study Abroad initiative, we conducted a pretty ambitious survey of people who have studied abroad. So this is focusing on American college and grad students who went abroad to either study or to volunteer or to work abroad. And the purpose of the survey was to basically gauge what connection, if any, is there between studying abroad and success in one's professional career. Since 2014, I believe we've been beating the drum of study abroad here at IIE through the Generation Study Abroad initiative. We want to double the number of American students who go abroad. And consistently what study abroad advisors tell us is that it's challenging to communicate to students as well as parents, who are really the people making the financial decisions, about the value of study abroad. And what do Americans care about? They care about jobs. So I say all of that to say we will finally be getting the results of that survey, and they will be released at the IIE Summit on Generation Study Abroad. That's happening in Washington, D.C., October 1st through the 3rd. Definitely head over to generationstudyabroad.org if you are interested in more information about the summit as well as registration. You want to see the pre-conference workshops. Definitely look on there, and we will be releasing the results of that survey and probably talking about it right here on IIE Global Office Hours at facebook.com/IIE Global. Do we have any more questions, Nikki?
We don't,
nope.
But I think a great question for our audience is what would they like to hear about in future office hours?
Thank
you.
So
if anybody has an idea, a topic, it doesn't just have to be on research. It could be on anything in the field of international education. You can send IIE a direct message by Facebook, and we would love to actually carry some of those ideas out.
Yeah, just to reiterate the voice of God behind the camera, Nikki, yes, if there's a particular topic or something that you're interested in hearing from us here at IIE, let us know. We have an inbox. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Do get in contact with us and let us know what you want to hear more about. I think these are it's really important for us to constantly serve our community, even more so during this time. And so we are very open to what you would like to hear, so let us know. And again, we are here today talking about globally mobile youth, or parachute kids, students who come from abroad to the United States for high school, often as a pathway to higher education. And this is Christine Perugia. So let the questions roll. So, okay. Another question for Christine. Tell us more about, so you said that earlier this year, IIE has conducted a number of surveys of international admissions officers and colleges and universities about the numbers that they're seeing from international students who are coming here, because there is a perception among certain populations of international students that they may have difficulties coming to the United States to study. So tell us about what we can look forward to seeing coming from the research shop in terms of surveys of colleges and universities. What kinds of surveys you're conducting? What should we look forward to?
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, we've done, in partnership with other higher ed associations, we've done several surveys. The first one earlier this year was focused on, how many international students were submitting applications. So we wanted to gauge if there had been any change from prior years. And then we just did the second one over the summer, looking at international student yield, to see if there's any changes from prior years. And what we found from both of those is that it's really been a mixed picture. Like, some institutions are seeing some impacts, but other institutions are not seeing it as much. So it's been very difficult from that to really predict what's going to happen. But certainly the next survey we'll be conducting is looking at the fall enrollment, sort of a snapshot of the fall 2017 enrollment. So once students arrive here on campus, what changes we're seeing, what concerns they're reporting, so that we can really try to keep a pulse on what is currently going on and what's currently in the minds of international students, and the challenges that higher education institutions are facing as they're trying to, keep up their international student enrollments and really maintain a diverse and robust international program.
Right. Yeah. So we have another audience question.
We have a question from Jamie. Are other leading host countries, other than the United States, seeing similar trends to the ones that you reported on in this study?
Well, the short answer is yes. So we also looked, as part of this report, we looked at other sort of English-speaking host countries. So looking at Canada, the UK, Australia. These are all countries, as well as the U.S., where we see a large number of higher education students coming from abroad. And in all of these countries, we've been seeing growth in high school students as well. So this is a trend not just driven by, schools in the U.S. are trying to increase the numbers of high school students, but it's really being driven by a lot of students who are seeking high school education in many countries around the world. And across the 4 countries that we looked at, again, it is very much students from China who are leading and who are the largest source of these students at the high school level. So yes, very similar trends that we see in a number of countries around the world.
Yeah. So speaking of Canada, a popular question that people ask is, is Canada gaining steam? Are more international students deciding to head over to north of the border to Canada for college and university, or even high school, as opposed to the United States?
Well, that's what we keep hearing, and I think there are some solid data points out there that are pointing, from our Canadian colleagues, that are pointing in the direction of, that they're seeing more applicants coming, really strong growth in the number of applicants to Canadian universities. So I expect that we're going to see some growth in students going to Canada. Does that necessarily correspond with potential decline in students coming to the U.S.? I'm not sure if that will be the case. We don't have strong evidence of that, and of course I'm a researcher, so I like evidence. So we don't really have strong evidence of that, but yeah, definitely we're seeing that Canada there's definitely been a strong interest from international students in studying in Canada.
Right. And the United States continues to be the #1 host destination of students who leave their home countries to go abroad, correct?
Right.
So just how far ahead is the United States in comparison to other countries?
Well, we are way far ahead. I mean, we host over 1 million international students in higher education. And a big part of that is that we have a huge higher education sector. We have over 4,000 colleges and universities. So we have a much larger higher education sector than many of the other host countries, and Canada included. So we're able to host really large numbers of students.
Right.
So, yeah.
And by the way, all of that data about the international students at the college and university level comes from the Open Doors report that is authored by the wonderful researchers here at IIE with support from the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And if you want to, explore the infographics from the report from last year, look at the report itself, or order the report itself, or look at the data highlights, go to iie.org/open doors, and that way you can see the data. If you've ever read any kind of news report that talks about the international students here in the United States, the $36 billion that they contributed to the U.S. economy last year, the 1 million international students who come to the U.S., those numbers come from that Open Doors report. So do head over to iie.org/open doors if you want more information about the higher ed level. And again, if you're looking for the topic of today's discussion, which is globally mobile youth at the secondary level, head over to our homepage at iie.org, and you can get a copy of that report for free. And it's really, really helpful, I think, for a lot of people in the international education space right now. So
we actually have 2 other questions that have come in. The first one is another from Jamie. Thank you, Christine.
Okay.
That's Jamie talking.
Great.
One other question I had reading the report. I see that the number of schools that are hosting international high school students are increasing. Do you believe that the number of international students coming to the U.S. for high school will be able to keep up with this demand?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? So the number of
schools that are actively hosting students is increasing, and that are actively seeking out students to host. Yeah. That's increasing. Do you believe that the number of students that are actually coming to the U.S. will be able to keep up with that demand?
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting data point that we found from the research, is that actually over the past 3 years, the annual growth that we've seen in the number of schools hosting students has been much higher than the growth we've seen in the actual number of students. So what that means is that more schools are getting in this market of high school students, but the growth of the students isn't keeping pace with that growth in the number of schools. So that could mean that there's just more competition for high schools who are trying to all sort of attract the same pool of students that isn't growing quite as fast as the number of the schools aren't growing quite as fast as the number of students.
We have another question from Ashley. With the majority of students coming from China currently at the high school level, what does this mean for diversity among international secondary students? Will the U.S.'s international secondary student population become homogenous? And I would just add, is that something that high schools think about or are concerned about?
Well, yeah, the population of students at the international students at the high school level has a limited diversity for sure. I mean, because it is, Chinese students are well represented and other students from East Asia as well. So we see, fewer students from Latin America, hardly any students from sub-Saharan Africa or from the Middle East or South Asia. So that's, an important thing to know is that, especially for higher ed institutions who are, potentially, recruiting from U.S. high schools for their international population, is that you're going to get a very limited diversity of students. And I'll also add that the students, not just in terms of economic diversity, but also, not in terms of geographic diversity, but also in terms of economic diversity. These are generally the students and who have wealthy families who are really able to invest in overseas education for many, many years because they're coming here for high school and they're really expecting to pay for overseas education and tuition and living costs all the way through higher education. So in terms of the socioeconomic diversity, that's also very limited for high school students.
Right. So yeah, the vast majority of international students who we see come to the United States are self-funded, or their parents are funding them, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. So I think we're going to have one more question or point, and then we're going to wrap this up. Any last thoughts or takeaways that you want people to know about the globally mobile youth? Perhaps, what do we think what will we see in a few years out from now? Anything like that?
Well, yeah. So you're asking me for a prediction. So, it's very interesting. I think we're still going to see very strong interest, but in terms of how much will the students continue to grow, it's a very difficult thing to say. In the most recent year, we saw just a 1% growth in international high school students. So it could be that, we'll see a plateau for a bit of time. But I think, in terms of the interest, I think we'll still see high levels because, many students and many families who are interested in overseas study, they're usually planning for this for a couple of years in advance. So it's not often, a quick decision on a whim, but it's, students have, they've already had to invest in learning English. They're coming here already with some English skills. So the students and the families who think they want to go for high school have already started down that path. So I think at least for a few years, we'll see, relatively steady numbers over the next few years.
Okay, great. Thank you for that projection, even though we don't have the data quite yet.
Yeah.
So again, this is Christine Ferrugia, the Deputy Head of Research here at IIE. Christine, thank you so much for talking with me today. My name is Shauna Childs, your host of IIE Global Office Hours. Thank you for joining us and submitting your questions. If you want to look at the report, head over to IIE.org. We have the link to the Globally Mobile Youth Research Report right there on the home page. If you're interested in data about international students at the higher education level, head over to IIE.org/open doors. And look for us in early October when we are discussing the findings of the Study Abroad survey. So thank you.